Think about this for a second. How do you go about building a multi-billion-pound wind farm or a massive solar array without actually knowing what electricity will cost tomorrow or next month or a decade from now? Well, the simple answer is you usually don't. The financial risk is just way too immense. But what if there was a way to guarantee those prices, shield developers from all that market chaos, and still protect us, the consumers, at the end of the day?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're demystifying the UK's primary mechanism for supporting new low-carbon power infrastructure. It's known as the Contracts for Difference Scheme, or CfDs. Drawing on comprehensive research from the House of Commons Library, we're going to dive into exactly how this clever financial tool works, look at its rather dramatic history of massive successes and failures, and figure out what it ultimately means for your energy bill.
Here's our agenda for today. We're covering 5 parts. Number 1, the UK's energy trilemma. 2, how CfDs actually work. 3, a renewable energy roller coaster. 4, the impact on your bill. And 5, future-proofing our power. Let's get right into it. Starting with Section 1, the UK's energy trilemma. For years, successive UK governments have been staring down this massive 3-part challenge. How exactly do you decarbonize electricity generation, ensure absolute energy security, and somehow keep it all affordable for the public?
That takes us to Section 2, how CfDs actually work. Because to solve this trilemma, the 2013 Energy Act introduced what's basically a magic mechanism to provide long-term market stability.
Right at the very heart of the CfD scheme is something called the strike price. This is a guaranteed fixed price for electricity that low-carbon generators receive per unit of power output, and they get this locked in over a 15-year contract. Think of this strike price as a giant financial shock absorber. Wholesale electricity prices are incredibly volatile. They bounce up and down daily. By fixing the price over 15 years, the government gives developers the rock-solid certainty they desperately need to secure funding and actually build these massive infrastructure projects. And you can really see how this shock absorber acts in real time. Look at the top flat line here. That's our agreed-upon strike price. Now, see that jagged, mountainous shape right in the middle? That is the highly volatile market price of electricity. There's a government-owned entity called the Low Carbon Contracts Company, and they manage the gap between these two lines. When the market revenue dips below that flat strike price line into the light green area, the generator is paid the difference. But look closely down at the bottom, where it dips below zero into that dark green area. So the absolutely crucial point here is that this is a two-way street. It's literally like a seesaw. When the market price of electricity is less than the strike price, the generator is paid a subsidy to make up the shortfall. But, and this is key, when the market price skyrockets and goes higher than the strike price, the seesaw tips. The generator doesn't just get to pocket those massive windfall profits. Instead, they actually pay the surplus back to the scheme, which ultimately goes right back to consumers.
Which brings us to Section 3, a renewable energy roller coaster. Because these contracts, they aren't just handed out. They are fiercely fought over in highly competitive reverse auctions known as allocation rounds.
Initially, the CfD scheme was just a roaring success, especially for offshore wind. Developers submit sealed bids, and the lowest bidders win the contracts. This intense competition drove prices down spectacularly. In allocation round 1, the strike price for offshore wind was sitting around £120 per megawatt hour. But by allocation round 3, it had plummeted to £40, and by round 4, it dropped even further, dipping under £40 per megawatt hour. Honestly, it seemed like this unstoppable race to the bottom for incredibly cheap green energy. But then we hit allocation round 5 in 2023, and boom, a massive speed bump. For the first time ever, not a single offshore wind developer submitted a bid. 0. The overall capacity of successful projects in round 5 dropped by a staggering 66% compared to round 4. The entire offshore industry essentially just walked away from the table. And this reality check sent shockwaves across the sector. Keith Anderson, the CEO of Scottish Power, called it a multi-billion-pound lost opportunity. He stated quite frankly that the economics simply did not stand up this time around. And why? Well, the maximum allowable strike price set by the government hadn't been adjusted to account for a harsh new economic reality. Soaring inflation, skyrocketing costs of capital, and global supply chain bottlenecks, the math just didn't work out for the developers anymore. Thankfully, the government pivoted. They adjusted their approach for allocation round 6 in late 2024, and we saw a solid recovery.
They secured a record 131 successful projects, including a massive 3.3 gigawatts of solar capacity, and we saw the crucial return of offshore wind at 1 gigawatt. But it is worth noting that while this was a really strong rebound from the disaster of round 5, the total capacity was still quite a bit below those soaring highs we saw back in round 4.
Moving to Section 4, the impact on your bill. Let's talk about how all these multi-billion-pound auctions directly affect your wallet. Take a look at the CfD allowance on typical domestic electricity bills. Between 2019 and 2021, the scheme added a relatively small cost to household bills. We're talking around $10 to $30 a year, as subsidies were being paid out to generators. But look at that massive dip in 2022 and 2023. During the height of the global energy crisis, when wholesale gas and electricity prices were just absolutely exploding, the CfD scheme acted as a financial shield. Because wholesale prices shot up way past the agreed strike prices, generators had to pay the surplus back. Under the energy price guarantee, this directly cut the taxpayer costs of the scheme.
To put that into perspective for you, the cumulative net value of CfD payments from the start of the scheme all the way to August 2024 was £8.9 billion. That is an enormous amount of money flowing between the low-carbon contracts company, energy suppliers, and these massive generation projects. It really highlights the sheer scale of the investment required to transition a national power grid.
Despite all those billions moving around behind the scenes, the actual impact on the individual consumer moving forward is relatively tiny. The energy consultancy Cornwall Insight estimates that the entire capacity added in the recent allocation round 6 will only add about $450 to average annual household energy bills by 2030. As they pointed out, while yes, there is a small cost, it's a very small price to pay to avoid the massive risks and crazy bill spikes of relying entirely on volatile international fossil fuel markets.
Finally, Section 5, future-proofing our power. So where exactly do we go from here? The government is currently exploring a review of electricity market arrangements. They call it REMA, and they're looking at 3 main ways to reform CfDs for future contracts. Step 1 is wholesale price exposure. This means instead of one single fixed strike price, generators might get a range, exposing them slightly to market signals so they generate power when we actually need it most. Step 2 is deemed generation, which proposes paying generators based on their potential output in a specific location, giving them a huge incentive to add battery storage. And Step 3 is a cap and floor system, providing generators a guaranteed minimum revenue, but strictly capping their maximum profits to protect us, the consumers.
All of this brings us right back to our original trilemma: decarbonization, security, and affordability. The Contracts for Difference scheme has undeniably transformed the UK's energy landscape. It's driven incredible investment and pushed down the raw costs of renewable tech. But, as that totally empty auction of round 5 showed us, the market is fragile and stability isn't free. As we look to reform this system to handle batteries, geographic challenges, and a volatile global economy, we're left with a critical question to consider. Are we willing to pay the true price of green energy security in an increasingly volatile world? Something to think about the next time you turn on the lights. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.